Hello and welcome to Lace Reviews. My name is Arvid, and today I'll be talking about the Scanners Trilogy. To my knowledge, it will be the first trilogy I'm covering on this channel, and I will try to keep it spoiler-free. The first Scanners from 1981, is made by David Cronenberg, who is one of the definite masters of horror, especially body horror. And does it feel like a Cronenberg movie? Yes, if you haven't seen his movies, The Fly, Dead Ringers, Naked Lunch, Videodrome, The Brood, also Existence, which I can't recommend. I think it's worth, people don't talk about that movie that often, and it's because it's not a good movie. The movie came out the same year as The Matrix and was produced at the same time, and those two films have so much in common. It's kind of uncanny how two movies that are so identical could come out without really inspiring each other. But returning to Scanners, I can say that this feels very much like a Cronenberg movie because it has a lot of focus on the body horror elements. It has some mysterious undertones. It has this eerie atmosphere that's quite common for his movies. There are science fiction elements that Cronenberg also often uses, but I can already say it's definitely not David Cronenberg's best movie. So yeah, the main plot is... okay, as I said, I will try to avoid spoiling the movie, but some things revealed at the end of this movie will be quite central to the plot in the two other movies. So I will spoil that part, and it has to do with the origin of the Scanners. So if you don't want that spoiled, I guess you should just jump right ahead to my recommendations, my wrap-up, because I will have to spoil it a bit here. I'll probably also talk about it a bit later. But at least you can skip ahead to the time code I will put in the video to avoid hearing the spoiler if you don't want it spoiled. But I will spoil it now. So it is revealed that scanners were created as a side effect of a drug that was used to sedate pregnant women. One of the main doctors working on this realized that there was the side effect, that it caused these babies that came out of these pregnancies to have special powers, telepathic, telekinetic. They were able to do all these sorts of things. It's one point talked about as that they are able to connect to the nervous system of other people. There are no firm rules established at just what can scanners do, what is the limit of the power. There seems to be no real limitation, and especially in the other movies, they just seem to do with them whatever they want. I'm kind of fine with it because the idea that a sedative can cause telekinetic powers in babies is already such an absurd idea that I do just accept the scientific elements of this at face value, more or less. The movie has people making other people's heads explode telepathically. They can ignite other people. They can do all these sorts of things. They can mind control. That's the main thing. This drug was used on pregnant women. It was quickly realized that there were these side effects, so it was withdrawn from the market. It's not a lot of people who be turned into these scanners, but they are out there and people are generally not that aware of them. So we follow this scanner. It starts with him looking like a homeless man, more or less, using his powers on this old, annoying, rich lady. And that results in him being caught by this private military arm that works with this pharmaceutical company. It's quite dystopian in that their uniforms look like a mix between fascist Italy and Star Wars. So just very fascist, very authoritarian. And at the same time, we have our villain established, who is a very powerful scanner. He is revealed in probably the movie and the franchise most memorable scene. Another scanner, one working with the company, working with the authorities. He invites people at this lecture to come up to him and he will read their minds. He will use his telepathy on them. These scanners, their existence is known to the world, but it's not very public information. It's revealed later on that a lot of people don't know about them, but at least some medical circles know about their existence. And in this process, the evil scanner makes the head of the other scanner explode. And that is a very memorable scene. It's a very, very good scene. And I will say the first 5, maybe first 10 minutes of this movie are really good. It has car chases. It has people being controlled telepathically. It has a car driving into a concrete barrier and thus blowing up because the car is made of methane, apparently. So it has a lot of really good scenes. And after this, it just becomes a bit boring. The lead character is taken in by this doctor, who's the main doctor of this pharmaceutical company. He gives him a drug that helps him calm down. These scanners often become mentally unstable. They constantly hear other people's thoughts. They can't really control themselves. The doctor then gives him this drug that will help him cope with these things. That will shut off these thoughts, but will also limit his scanner abilities. Meanwhile, the villain is building a scanner army, and our protagonist is sent to infiltrate them, find out what's going on, and put an end to it. And that's the main gist of it. So what can I say about the movie? I think the premise is quite interesting. I do like the idea The problem is the execution is actually not necessarily that interesting when you see people staring at other people and throwing them around a bit just by looking at them and by twisting your head. It's actually not as exciting as it probably should be. It has some really good effects and sometimes really scary effects. It has both really good effects towards the end and also semi-bad effects that end up still looking quite nasty and intimidating. So that's the funky thing, that this army of scanners that goes against our protagonist, they don't really use their powers, so I'm not even sure they are scanners, but the plot tells us that they are, or they at least work for the main scanner. So they probably are scanners, but if we never see them use their powers, they always just use a bunch of shotguns and blast everything to pieces. And even that isn't that exciting. For having the pump action shotguns they have, they really don't do a lot of damage to things. That's a bit lame, honestly. And yes, it has this Cronenberg atmosphere, this Cronenberg feeling, and it's quite eerie. The pharmaceutical company being this private enterprise functioning as its own little government, controlling its own territory, doing to people as it pleases. That's quite scary as a thought, but it's not really implemented that well. It's not really executed that well. It has some really bad dialogue. It has some really bad elements. It has some revelations that are not revelations because there's only one person who could be doing that in that case. And of course, you're not then surprised when it's revealed that it's that person who's doing it. It has this guy monologuing to himself for a very long time. It's just zooming in on his head while he's monologuing, and his monologue is really bad. It's not interesting at all. And yeah, it's honestly just very underwhelming. I expected much more from Cronenberg. And I actually thought this was one of his early movies, but then I realized he made movies like The Brood before this. This just doesn't seem like a very decent movie. I can give it a low recommendation just because it has some nice effects. It has a good beginning and a decent ending. And the plot is good. The execution is just way too boring. And it does have a few moments that are comically bad or just outright bad. But yeah, if you really like Cronenberg, you might want to give it a check. If you are interested in seeing heads pop, this has that happening. Only once though, but it happens. It has, again, decent effects. I'm not hating on this movie. I think it actually deserves a solid C, making it watchable but not highly recommendable. So Scanners 2, The New Order, came out 10 years later in 1991. Why this wait, I'm not sure, but never mind. I can say that it's not made by Cronenberg, but it's still heavily inspired by the style of Cronenberg. And the movie, oddly, it doesn't really feel like a 90s movie. In many ways, it feels much more like an 80s movie, much more so than the first Scanners. Though it does have some of the signs of the early 90s, it has the blandest color palette of, I think, any movie I've ever seen. Everything is clinically white, with tones of grey. And I don't know why. Because the movie doesn't really have that clinical a premise. The plot is not inherently medical or clinical, even though it does still deal with this drug and with medical corporations. But aside from that, there's no real reason for it to look as white as it does. I am curious if it was only the copy I watched that had this very, very saturated white look. Not even saturated, just very white look, very plain white look. I don't hate it, but it does make the movie look a bit dull, unfortunately. I think it could have been a bit better with more colors, but honestly, it also kind of suits it, especially as it makes the red blood look even redder, and it makes all the people look more sickly, and inherently also more white and evil. It does really have a very diverse cast. I think, aside from one person, everybody in this movie is white. So having them have grey and white hair with pale faces and red eyes makes them all look very sickly, and some of them also look sickly in an evil way. Actually, now that I think about it, none of these movies have any non-white scanners. This movie has one that might be pure Latino. I don't know why all other scanners would be white except one. It would make sense that this drug was only tested on one community. So therefore, it actually kind of makes sense that everybody would be the same ethnicity if it's only a small community that was tested in the 40s and 50s, where white communities were quite white in America. So, but honestly, knowing American medical history, they probably would have tested on minorities first. So in that sense, they actually should all be African American, Latino, whatever. That is just not even funny. That's just really tragic. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go in and look up how they tested LSD and prevention of syphilis and medicine against syphilis. It's quite scary stuff. But let's not talk too much about these real conspiracies, but rather the conspiracy that is the New Order. So the plot of this movie is quite detached from the previous movie. This doesn't really feel like a direct sequel that much to the previous film. It doesn't really have anything to do with the plot of that film. The performances don't add any quality to this movie, and in fact, one character is so awful. His acting is so bad and so over the top, but in a bad way, that I hated the scenes with him. And that is sadly the Latino actor I talked about before, because the movie opens with him running away from the police, and he has these, I think they're dreadlocks, and he looks like a crazy hobo. He actually kind of looks like an extra in that Steven Seagal film where he takes down the Jamaican mafia, which actually made me think he was African American at first, just because I had that association, but no, I'm quite sure he's Latino. But anyway, he's running away from the authorities, ends up at an arcade. Again, this feels like a very 80s movie. He ends up at the arcade and gets really fascinated with all these games the kids are playing, and I don't know why nobody's really reacting to this creepy guy, because everybody else looks very 80s. He certainly doesn't. He looks like a creep. And it's then revealed, actually, it was a part of the plot in the previous movie that scanners can take over computers, because if they can log onto human nervous systems, they can also log onto the systems of computers, because, logic, apparently. And he does that with a light gun game, and he takes it over with his mind. People react to it and get really weirded out, because scanners are still not really a thing people know about. Of course, he acts out, throws a bunch of people around with his mind. The police show up after a little chase in a warehouse, because of course you need a chase through a dark warehouse with mannequins, and he starts talking to all these mannequins as if they are talking to him. So he's so crazy from being a scanner that he even hears voices from things that can't make voices, because he's caught by this medical corporation. They show all these scanners that they have all drugged up. They have hooked them up on this drug, and they try to rehabilitate this Latino scanner. And then we have our protagonist of the film, this young veterinarian who has always been a bit of an outsider. His parents didn't want him to hang around other children, and it's because he's always had this scanner gift, but he's never really understood it. It has never really been that strong, that powerful. It has never really dominated his mind, as we see with some of the other scanners. But then, in one scene where two robbers, who are actually quite nicely clad, they don't really look like your typical New York hoodlum, they are robbing this convenience store with him and his girlfriend in it, with shotguns. And in retaliation, he can't control himself, so he pushes him against the glass, and it kind of shatters him and falls down, and his head just pops open, spraying out blood, and you have your first head burst, and it is glorious. Given the effects might not be as good as in the first film, but they're still quite good here. And then, because he kills this person unwillingly, but still kind of willingly, he still can't really control his mind. He is approached by this medical corporation, and who tell him that they will help him, but he also has to help them. And I think that's where I will end it with the plot. So the premise is a bit, not nonsensical, it's just you don't really care about the premise for this movie. It's not that weak. I don't know if it's weaker than the first movie. The plot kind of makes sense when it's revealed to you. It is also explained why there is a new generation of scanners. And honestly, I don't know the timeline for these movies, because this would have had to take place probably 20 years after the previous movie. And the next movie probably takes place 30 years after this movie. So there's something about the timeline that's really convoluted, and you probably shouldn't think about it too much, but I couldn't help about being bothered about it a little. Not only the concept of medicine causing these things is science fiction, but the weapons look very sci-fi as well. None of the shotguns, none of the pistols in this movie look ordinary stuff. So maybe it does try to be a futuristic movie. Maybe it does try to not be set in the late 80s, early 90s, but actually be set in maybe the early 2000s. You know, the strange future of 2001. But even then, why would they play an old arcade game? So I'm just giving this movie too much credit. I think they just wanted to be creative with their weaponry. It kind of works. I can't be too critical of that. The whole movie does feel a bit odd. It does have quite a lot of boring moments. But then when it does have practical effects, when it does have kills, given that not many of them, but when it does happen, they're generally very entertaining. I do like the kills in this movie. I think it is a bit more action-packed than the previous movie. More happens in it. I should also know that it has a very good end credit song, or at least a very 80s end credit song. I think I enjoyed this movie better than I enjoyed the first movie. I cannot say it's a better movie. It really isn't. I think actually if you liked the first movie, but liked it mostly for the effects, you will maybe enjoy this movie. If you didn't enjoy the first movie, there's probably no reason why you would enjoy this one. So Scanners 3, The Takeover, also came out in 1991. According to some sources I found, it was released in 1992. And what can I say about this movie? It's bonkers. This is a very bad movie, but I also like it. I kind of like this movie. This one ups the science fiction elements even more than the previous movie. The twists and turns are explained so poorly that you might not pick up on them. That happened to me. I had to watch several scenes multiple times to understand what happened. Also because, honestly, some of those scenes are so boring that I really zoned out and had to watch them again. But the main plot of it in this one is that you have a brother and a sister. The brother accidentally kills someone with his scanner abilities. He's trying to use it as a party trick, but someone disturbs him and he accidentally throws a guy over a balcony. And as a result, he goes to live in seclusion in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand. And I will give this movie credit. What credit is due, they actually go to Thailand, which is cool. These low-budget movies rarely go to the locations they're supposed to take place in. The rest of it is shot in Quebec. The brother and the sister are both adopted. They know they are adopted, and I think it's hinted that they were adopted after the events of the second film. They're adopted by this CEO of this great pharmaceutical company, who also works with treating scanners. And she had a troubled childhood. Seems like she also always felt left out, because the dad, from a quite early age, made it quite clear that the son was the intended heir of the company, whereas he just wanted a daughter of his own, something like that. Which also is a bit weird to understand. The gender patterns of the early 90s were a bit more conservative than they are today. But that does seem like a douchey motivation, that you adopt two children with a specific purpose of having someone who can take over your company and someone to keep your company. It's a bit of a douchey move. Anyway, after this girl is attacked in an alleyway by 3 punk hoodlums who look like this should be an 80s movie, but at the same time look so poorly 80s that they really don't belong in the 80s. She uses her scanner abilities, maybe for the first time in her whole life, to dispose of them. She almost kills them. Her friend, who also works for the company, actually managed to save them in the last minute. But after experiencing this, she goes to seek the help from her father. At controlling her emotions, she apparently takes pills to control her thoughts. Because as with the other movies, they can't keep other people's thoughts out. It's a constant hassle for them. They are deeply traumatized by this, making it very difficult to live, but at least they have not developed a drug they can take. But then they're also working on a new drug that is not so much a drug, but works a bit like a nicotine sticker, in that you put it behind your ear, and it's really big, and it's for 24 hours. It is supposed to make all your bad thoughts go away, and make you more or less able to live as a normal person. Because what the pills do is, yes, they make your bad thoughts go away, but they also make everything go away. It's basically like a numbness pill. So it removes all your life qualities. It basically makes you neither depressed nor happy nor nothing. Like actually a lot of drugs do in real life, sadly. So anyway, there's this. He has invented this new thing that they're still testing in the lab. He shows it to her saying, well, when they're done testing it, it will be released and it will make the lives of scanners much more pleasant. He is generally shown to be a good guy, even with this kind of pathetic motivation of having a daughter as a pet company piece. But then the same night, she has some nightmares. It causes her to have a lot of bad side effects. She drops all the pills, and instead of picking them up and taking them, she realizes she can just try this experimental thing. And that thing turns her into a murderous monster. She will now stop at nothing to have her revenge and to accumulate ultimate power. There's never really given any proper motivation why that is the motivation. It just seems that it's just the evil thing to do, so that's what the motivation for the character is. And of course, our protagonist, who is still in Thailand, has to stop her. And yes, that is the main plot of the film. I think I could probably talk about it for a very long time. I will do it very briefly. This is a very interesting movie in that it's so bad. It's so bad and so mind-boggling bad at times that, yes, there are plot holes, there are reality gaps that make you wonder and make you think and make you sigh, but at the same time, they will probably also entertain you quite a lot. It also has some amazing hairstyles. The woman in it, the antagonist, she has so many different amazing hairstyles in the movie. It's so 90s, it's so unbelievably early 90s, and I really liked it. It's just, oh, there's some really good hairstyles in this movie. You also get to see her naked, which is the only movie in this franchise, from what I remember, where you actually see a naked person. Anyway, it's there in the movie. It has a lot of practical effects and a lot of murders, and some of the effects are really good. Some of them are so bad that they become entertaining. It has, from what I count, 4 head bursts that I like. That's good. That's interesting. It does a lot new with the premise. Again, it kind of makes world building even more stupid, throws even more out the window and pulls even more out of its ass. It's so much more science fiction that I can't help but enjoy it. It also has, honestly, the acting is really, really, really bad. But the acting of the lead antagonist, the lady, is so bad that it becomes engaging. You really want to see how she wrecks the scenes. There's even one scene where she presents the drug to some people she wants to help, but instead of doing it in a natural way, she puts on a smiling face and does like this fake TV ad commercial for them. It's just weird. It's such a weird decision. It has so many weird scientific weapons in this. It has something that looks like a mini Uzi and Ingram that makes pistol sounds, and the guy shooting it is never pointing at the target. Shooting is just kind of shooting all over the place and still almost hitting. It has a grenade launcher, but only the grenades don't really make things blow up. He should really be hurt in that scene if they actually are grenades. It has arms coming off. It has heads being pulled wide. It has heads blowing up like balloons. It has fingers exploding. Oh yeah, I didn't even mention, in Thailand, the evil scanners using Thai boxers as their own puppets, so they use them to fight against the protagonists. I actually enjoyed it much more than the other movies. I was never really that bored. There were some moments where they had to explain some of the plot elements, plot devices had to further the plot that were bad or boring. And the ending is just quite bonkers in not the best way. But I can actually recommend this as a bad movie. If you like So Bad It's Good, you would probably enjoy this movie. Anyway, I think that leaves me with a wrap-up. Scanners by Cronenberg is an underwhelming Cronenberg movie, but it's by no means a bad movie. It's just not a great movie. It's not maybe even a good movie. It's just a decent movie. The sequel is an odd sequel that has a very weird stylistic look and feels a bit all over the place, but actually has some moments that make it interesting and make it engaging. So if you feel like you want to see more, then you can watch the second movie it has. And then you have the third film that is just bonkers. How could they make this? How could they think this was a good idea? But yes, in a very entertaining way. Quite entertaining, I will not say very, because it's maybe setting the bar of your expectations too high. I can recommend that one. And that's where I will leave it today. If you are interested in reading my individual reviews, you can check out my Letterboxd profile on The Robot Quits. You can find the link in the description. Anyway, take care. Have a nice day. Bye bye.